The format of the event will be as follows. There'll be opening statements from each candidate, which will be timed for 2 minutes, and then we will go on to the questions. We've got 11 questions which were submitted. We may not get through them all, but we'll try our best to get through as many as possible. We had questions submitted from you in the audience. Some of them were a bit similar, so we grouped them together to make one composite question, and others a standalone. In the run-up to this event, we invited candidates from all 6 main parties to join us. You can see we've got representatives from Plaid Cymru and Sian, Gwenllian, the Green Party of Wales and Amy Nicholas, and Welsh Labour in Chris Binding. We did have a positive response from the Liberal Democrats as well, but unfortunately their candidate had to drop out due to work requirements at the last minute. We did invite Reform and the Conservatives, but we didn't get a response from them. All the candidates have been sent copies of the manifesto and some of the questions in advance, because we're not trying to catch people out here. We're trying to get a clear exposition of the party's policies and priorities. And just to let you know, the order of responses which we'll go to has been decided somewhat randomly. So we'll ask different questions first for different candidates first for different questions. We are allowing brief follow-up questions from you, but I would please ask you to keep them to questions, not statements or reflections. So that we can actually make them relevant to discussion. But you're very welcome to put wider statements or reflections in the chat if you wish. So just to give a little bit of context, the development of the Stronger Welsh Communities Manifesto came from widespread consultation. We held some 20 events across Wales, mostly last year, and engaged with some 300 community organisations in doing so to get a sense of the priorities for communities. For many people working in communities, politics isn't something they naturally engage in. People like doing things locally and practically, but in a sense, politics has become a much greater focus of what people have had to do, partly because of the nature of things that have have put pressure on communities. A lot of them to do with austerity, which sure everybody in this room recognises, and the degree to which organisations have had to step into areas which were once the realm of public services has inevitably led to a greater focus on governmental decision making. And the final interesting thing is that the party manifestos that we've read have mentioned the word community almost 400 times. And we'd like to use this time to actually explore the sentiment behind that headline and actually find out what it means. I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to come to the candidates for their opening statements. And there'll be two minutes for these before we go into the first question. So I'm going to ask Chris if you'd like to start for us.
Chris, and noswaith dda pawb. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you this evening. As a long-time community volunteer myself with various organisations, I know how important community groups are to the everyday life of the areas in which we live. In recent years, families across Wales have weathered too many storms. We've faced a pandemic that upended our lives, grappled with the cost of living crisis that emptied pockets, and endured over a decade of hard Tory cuts that left Wales on the ropes. Far beyond our budgets, these years left deep scars. Faith, hope, and trust in politics were battered almost beyond repair. Our communities are still being supported by volunteers who roll up their sleeves and make life better for each and every one of us. My party, Labour, believes that by the strength of our common endeavour, we achieve more than we do alone. It is quite literally the words that are printed on our party membership cards. But I'm also a member of the Cooperative Party. Whilst most people know about the cooperative shops, co-op ideas don't live there. We believe that the principles that lie behind successful cooperatives, that's a democratic control by customers and workers, and a fair share of wealth that we create together, ought to be extended to the wider community and society. For 14 years, successive Welsh Labour governments have protected our communities from the deepest of Conservative cuts. Now, with 2 Labour governments working together for Wales, we move into a new chapter, a chapter where Wales's potential can be unleashed and where communities are supported. I want to thank everyone here who volunteers and has given up their time this evening. I'm really looking forward to what is my first hustings. So, diolch.
Thank you very much for that, Chris, and gai ofyn Sian i dod nesaf, please.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, a diolch am y gwahoddiad i siarad heno yma. Cymunedau sy'n creu yn gwlad ni. Mae'n cymunedau wrth galon popeth da ni'n geisio i gyflawni, a popeth da ni'n geisio i gyflawni ym Plaid Cymru. Mae Plaid Cymru wedi gwreiddio yng nghymunedau Cymru, a da ni'n atebol yn unig i bobl Cymru. Dyda ni ddim yn gorfod bod yn atebol i bencadlys yn Llundain, a mae hyn yn wahanol i bob plaid arall, wrth gwrs, a da ni ddim yn atebol chwaith i'r sefydliad yn San Steffan. Communities are the life and soul of our country, at the heart of everything that we are trying to achieve as a political party in Plaid Cymru. Supporting our communities means supporting our country. And this focus on communities can be held across a range of sectors. And if you look at our manifesto, you will see that the focus is across planning, where we'll introduce a community right to buy. It is included within the section on energy, where we emphasise the importance of community ownership in our efforts to reach net zero, and in the economy. The focus is on Welsh anchor institutions as drivers of economic growth, and of course this includes social businesses, the social enterprises centred in our communities. For too long, I think that successive Labour governments have focused on trying to bring outside investment. Well, we have got huge potential within our communities, and Plaid Cymru is ready to unleash some of that. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr, Sian. Finally, Amy, please.
Hi, noswaith fel pawb. Amy Nicholas dwi. I'm representing the Green Party today, and I'm the lead candidate in the Ceredigion Penfro constituency. So I started out my journey with sort of community engagement when I was just a child, and I was able to attend a community youth dance project. So the smell of kind of wood floor polish still takes me back to those days where I had somewhere to go that was fun to meet up with people, even though I might not have had lots of money to do lots of other things. And there was a big meeting of different kinds of people from different backgrounds coming together to create something really lovely. So I then went on to actually help with the disabled adults group at Rubicon Dance when I was quite a bit older in Cardiff. So I can see where having a cultural space that is really important for community to come together has really impacted my life, and I've seen how it's impacted others who maybe can't access other kinds of facilities. Now, I didn't pursue a career in dance because issues with the environment really came to the fore with me. I became really passionate about trying to make a difference with environmental issues, and I went on to do an environmental sciences degree and got involved in the Green Party about a decade ago. I've moved to Pembrokeshire, North Pembrokeshire, about 5 years ago, and I got straight in there. Wherever I've lived, I got involved in community projects, and I helped to set up the Repair Cafe in my local village. And I'm so grateful that people prior to me have got a community pub and community cafe. So I really live that kind of, let's make sure that community is vibrant, and there's lots of things for people to do in a community space. I also happen to work for an incredible organisation called Together for Change, and I support communities across rural Wales to do research and things that they care about. So I'm often up and down on the T5, going up to all kinds of parts of rural Wales on buses, discovering what it's like on the ground for communities and realising some of the challenges people face, but also the incredible things that are happening. So you've got stuff like Hardy Sheds, where you've got organisations supporting people's mental well-being, and I've been along there to do some of the green woodworking that they have. So I'm really super passionate about community projects. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you very much. And I think what a number of you have actually talked about in your introduction to actually lead us on to the next question, which is, and Amy, you'll actually be speaking first on this one, then and you may be able to build on what you just said. So why does your party think the work of community organisations is important across Wales? And then a slightly more personal element, have any particular organisations affected you?
Okay, yeah. So I think because we really think about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act with everything that we do, it's very much about putting people and planet first, above anything to do with profit, and trying to balance those things out. So people at the heart of all of our decisions, as well as the environment. So we know that people in their local environment know best. So when decisions are made in Cardiff, miles and miles away from rural West Wales, where I'm based, for example, that doesn't really fit with people. When I work with communities on the ground through my job, they tell me that, okay, so maybe that might work in a city, but that policy doesn't work with us locally. So, but also you can't just say every local community is the same, because they might suffer from similar challenges around cost of living, for example, but they have very specific challenges as well at a local level. So making sure that those people are heard in those communities is really important, that kind of grassroots endeavour. We want to make sure that that kind of planning is there to require minimum green spaces, easy access to local shops, and protection of heritage buildings. In terms of what's impacted me in organisations, as I said before, I work for Together for Change. They're very much embedded in community. From my previous project on the Transport and Health Integrated Research Network, where I've got to know the amazing team at the Community Transport Association, so how those kind of community level transport things really support community growth. I've had some fantastic training from the Co-Production Network in how to do co-production work, and Repair Cafe Wales, who weren't on your manifesto, but I worked really closely with them for many years in terms of the incredible work that volunteers do to fix things for free for people. If you've never been to Repair Cafe or gone to a Benthyg Cymru share library, they are the kind of places where you really feel that community spirit. You really feel like people are giving their time for nothing, for no expectation, and trying to make a positive difference. So I think that's where we're coming from on it.
Thank you, Amy. Sian, nesaf, please.
Wel, na I siarad chi bach o brofiad personol. Nes I ddechrau, siŵr o fod, I gymryd llawer iawn o ddiddordeb mewn gwleidyddiaeth drwy waith cymunedol. O'n i'n gadeirydd cyngor cymuned y Felinheli, ac yn y cyfnod yna, nes I wneud cais I gael grant I adnewyddu neuadd y pentref. Oedd y neuadd angen gwaith sylweddol arno fo, ac fi sy'n llwyddiannus ar ran y cyngor cymuned I gael grant o £250,000 o bunna ar gyfer adfer yr ganolfan, ac mae hi yn llawn bwrlwm o weithgareddau erbyn hyn sydd yn wych I weld yn y pentra lle dwi'n byw, sef y Felinheli. Fi ydi ymgeisydd Gwynedd Maldwyn dros Blaid Cymru yn yr etholiad yma, ac mae Gwynedd Maldwyn yn llawn o weithgareddau cymunedol. Fi si pnawn yn Pennal, yn y ganolfan, oedden ni digwydd bod yn Canfassion Pennal, ond yn y ganolfan oedd na fore coffi yn digwydd, ac athyn ni wahoddiad I mewn, ac mae hi jyst yn wych I weld y bwrlwm sydd yn digwydd yna, a'r lles mae math yna o weithgaredd yn olygu I bobl. Dwi wedi bod yn rhan o Fanc Bwyd y Mangor, mi oedd Plaid Cymru yn rhedeg Banc Bwyd, da ni dal I redeg y Banc Bwyd y Mangor bob dydd Sul ers misoedd, ers y cyfnod clo dwi'n credu. Felly, dwi'n gobeithio bod chi'n gweld bod fi yn angerddol dros y gwaith cymunedol, a dwi'n siŵr gawn ni gyfle yn ystod y noson wan I drafod mwy ynglyn â gwerth cefnogi y math yma o weithgaredd sydd yn llenwi bylcha yn aml iawn ac yn rhan mor bwysig o'n ffordd ni o fyw yng Nghymru.
Diolch yn fawr, Sian. And Chris, please.
Chris. So, yeah, talking about my personal experience, I first became involved with the neighbourhood watch group when I was 16 or 17 in Michigan in Mountain Ash. I've involved with a bus group of people that were complaining about bus services. That seems a perennial problem. And most recently, I volunteered with Citizens Advice in Northern Cymru Care and Repair in Cwmtaf, which is Merthyr and RCT. And I chair Merthyr Pride, a grassroots community organisation that hosts Merthyr's first ever LGBTQ+ celebration, and we're in for our third event this year. But we talk about community groups being a part in the community, but they are a community. They are the things that sustain our way of life. And when people have very little time to give, they still find time to get involved, to make things happen. And it's always amazed me that people are so generous, not just with money, but with their time as well. And I'm a candidate in Pontypridd, Cynon, Merthyr, and you only have to look around to the old miners' welfare halls that miners built out of their pay. They contributed because there was that sense of community. Predates the NHS, but they had reader rooms, they had leisure activities. There was a greater sense there. And I think we are very worthy sort of successors to that as well. So I think, yes, really important to have that sense of community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. So we got it's really heartening to hear all your personal experiences as well. So I'm going to move on to a question more about the policy side of things. How will your party ensure that community-led action becomes a core part of Welsh Government policy? So I'm going to ask if Sian could come on to that one first.
Yes, thanks. A really important question to be asking of our parties on, the eve of the election. So Plaid Cymru would provide more specialist support to create, grow and sustain new community-led initiatives. We'd also strengthen social partnership models to ensure that voluntary organisations that work closely with public sector delivery organisations have a real say in the design and implementation of services. Because, of course, we recognise that public services function at their best as part of an ecosystem of equal and interrelated partners, and obviously community-based initiatives are such an important part of that. Our manifesto on the economy and the book called Making Wales Work, which has led to the economy part of our manifesto, has a whole chapter dedicated to community wealth, assets and activity, because we do see this as a core part of a sustainable economic development. So there's more information there if anybody wants to have a look at that. And so making, it's not just one aspect, is it? It's bringing the whole of the different aspects around community-led action into, it's part of our values in Plaid Cymru. And so it would become part of Welsh Government policy across all the different sectors. It's not just confined to one little silo somewhere. It's part and parcel of what Plaid Cymru-led government would be doing.
Yep, done. Chris.
We've got a plan for a community right to buy. I heard, I think it was Amy mentioned that earlier as well, but just to take a little plug in, this has been cooperative party policy for a long, long time. I'm really pleased that it now features in Welsh Labour's manifesto this time. We're also planning citizens' assemblies to better connect. So lots of decisions are really complicated. It's good to involve people in that democracy. It should extend beyond Cardiff Bay. So citizens' assemblies are in the manifesto. That's a really important body too. But I think on the community right to buy, we've seen so many instances where community assets are lost. So it's about empowering those communities to be able to not just purchase them, but ensure that the running of them becomes sustainable. Things that I can see Lee Gardens on the core, which is just down the road from me and very well supported by Adam Fox, who's from the local council. An amazing resource. The council were going to close it many years ago, and a group of dedicated volunteers saved it. It's well used. It's really popular in the summer, and lots of my friends with young kids take them along. It's worth doing. So it's how can we embed that ethos of cooperatives. And I mean, just to plague that the Welsh Labour government that we have now has invested in those co-ops and mutuals and doubled them. There is an unprecedented number of these organisations. The benefits in terms of the circular economy, but that money being reinvested in is huge. And I'll mention a little bit later about our energy generation plans and how we have a plan for a Welsh Wealth Fund, which is a bit of a tongue twister. But yeah, definitely worth doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And finally on this question, Amy, please.
Thank you, Joe. So when I work a lot in community myself, or supporting communities to do it, they have a wealth of ideas. They might even be able to find little pockets of money, but it's some of that sort of infrastructure around the policy landscape that sometimes gets in the way, especially sometimes access to long-term funding. So some of the things that we're looking at from a really top perspective is a cabinet secretary for arts, culture and language. And that includes recognising that culture is such a thing that is so powerful to keep communities in cohesion and flourishing. We want public participation in planning. So that is strengthening communities so they have a real voice at for local development plans, and especially major development plans, especially around renewables. We want a statutory chief planner in local authorities to make sure that those rights of communities are supported, their voices are heard. So we want to make sure that local authorities have the proper resourcing so that they can listen to community voices properly. We want to have, again, the right to buy. I won't go back to that one. We want to have community-led housing, including cooperatives. We want to see community land trusts, especially around co-housing and delivering affordable homes to meet local needs, because as I've said before, locals know what their needs are best. We want to see Land Reform Act, giving stronger rights to communities to acquire land and buildings. And we want to see a community land fund to help local groups purchase sites for cultural spaces, community enterprises, and creative regeneration. We want to see a cultural rights framework as well, which provides a guide for decision-making across the public sector. So you've got a bit more of that joined up thinking there.
Okay, thank you very much. The second big strategic question, which we'll come on to, is about the Future Generations Act. And in the context of the Future Generations Act, how will your party ensure that public bodies are enabled to work with communities, particularly to undertake long-term preventative action? And I wonder if, Chris, you might come in first on this, followed by Sian and then Amy.
I mentioned briefly our plans for a community right to buy law that we're pledging. So that's going to change how public bodies work with our communities. I think during the era of Tory austerity, there was a huge amount of pressure on public bodies to hive off assets to make money. It's now right that we look to implement a system that involves communities and thinking about how we function in the long term. So the pledge that we have in our manifesto is to give consideration to that, to introduce a community right to buy. And as I say, we can learn from what's happened in England and Scotland to make sure that we get this just right and it does meet the needs of our communities. It's no good having a right there if the support doesn't follow. We've also got that pledge, as I mentioned, about citizens' assemblies, because that link, I mean, trust in politics has been shaken, and there are some parties who have interest in making that so. But I think restoring that trust, having that conversation with civic society is really important. The Social Partnership Act has worked really well. I'm a trade unionist by background, and it's worked really well there. And it's how we can involve our communities. So things are done with communities, not to communities. And so I'm really impressed actually with that in the manifesto. And as I say, I want a big shout out to the Co-op Party because they have been pushing this for a long time, and they've been proven right. Yeah, I think that's me done. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Chris. Sian, would you like to come next, please?
Thank you. I think that community-led organisations and the voluntary sector across Wales is already playing a vital role in delivering the ambitions of the Future Generations Act. You know, when we look at tackling long-term challenges around inequality and strengthening community resilience. But I think really what we need now is to focus in on the collaborative work that needs to happen. One of the aspects of the Future Generations Act is to make us move towards this kind of more collaborative way of achieving our goals. And just to give you one example, in healthcare, we believe in moving towards the preventative side of healthcare, and we can learn from other parts of the UK about some of the models that are being used in Belfast, for example, the Northern Irish neighbourhood care model, which brings in primary care providers and voluntary workers in a single community hub to provide support and advice. I mean, that's just one example of how the collaborative aspects should be more of our focus going forward. So that we a holistic approach to matters like healthcare and on the environment as well. One of the manifesto commitments we've made is for the Flood Resilience and Preparedness Forum for Wales. That would include the community organisations as well as NRW and the emergency services, etc. So those are just two examples, I think, for how we can make this act work much better for us.
Diolch, Sian. And Amy, please.
Okay, so I'm going to go through what's in the manifesto, and if I've got time, I might do a bit of reflection on what I personally think, because in the Green Party, we are allowed to stand on our own 2 feet in our local areas, and I work a lot in this area, so I have my own thoughts. So how I see it in terms of what's in our manifesto, when you're trying to bring together public bodies and communities, in my experience, you need a space to do so, a space that feels welcoming and neutral, where people can be on equal terms. And so what we're looking for is spaces for collaboration. So in our manifesto is a requirement for local authorities to ensure access to free, warm, welcoming cultural spaces, for example, libraries, youth centres, sports facilities, community halls, that those spaces are being in good repair. I have visited Scouts Hall recently, and even my local Memorial Hall, the showers are in terrible states, for example, or the paint was peeling off the walls in this Scouts hut. It needs to be a nice place to come. And if people from a kind of local authority or something is going to meet a community in their space, it needs to be feeling like it's a legitimate space to be, that is kind of well looked after. So we want to make sure there's funding for good repair of these spaces. We want to make sure there's national minimum standards set for places like libraries, museums and archives to maintain core cultural services. We want to see communities supported to protect and manage green spaces and heritage sites. We want to have local authorities ensuring access to pitches, sports halls, play areas, training spaces with a minimum safety and accessibility standards, including things like skateboarding, BMXing and parkour. We want to make sure that grassroots rugby and football clubs are protected as community institutions with long-term sport access investment. In terms of actually getting people to work together and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, that is something that needs quite a lot of work in terms of making sure the Public Service Board's team actually have time out of their busy work lives to come and speak to communities, because that is something that you need some teeth behind a lot of the stuff that's going on in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It's got incredible potential.
We've had a series of questions on strategy and big picture, the way in which communities fit into Welsh Government strategy, a number which are about resourcing and support now. And I'll come to actually Amy first on this, followed by Chris, and then Sian. Short-term unstable grants are a major barrier for community organisations. What commitments can your party make to ensure access to longer-term sustainable funding rather than short-term or pilot-based grants?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. I suffer from this myself in terms of I work a lot on community projects which are short-term funded. So I feel the pain. Especially when organisations, you have really good staff members that you can't maintain because then they have a short-term contract and need to move on, or you've created a relationship across communities and networks and then that isn't sustained. So I really understand. In terms of what we could maybe offer, I'll just list them out: a green transformation fund for Wales, an economic strategy to follow the vision of the wellbeing of future generations, measuring prosperity through fair work, environmental sustainability and social well-being. So it's not just your normal metrics. We're looking at those more holistic metrics because I know one of the challenges is actually cost-benefit analysis and all those kind of things. We need to look at it more broadly. We want to support the development of the Bank Cumbria fully develop it and strengthen communities to tackle climate and nature crisis. So if your work is around those kind of things, then that will be a benefit. Call for greater borrowing powers from Welsh Government so we can actually give more money to community groups. Cooperative Development Hub to scale community-focused enterprises. Local authorities encouraged to make better use of social enterprises. And then exploring the idea of a community wealth building bill to keep money circulating in Welsh communities.
Thank you. Christy, next on this one.
I'm involved with organisations who have these same concerns, and I think they have a variety of different funding, whether it's Welsh Government, local government, UK, charitable. It is an issue, and I think one of the things I'm really pleased with is that the Welsh Government, I'm not speaking for the Welsh Government, but I know that Welsh Labour ministers really value the third sector as an essential partner in delivering government's objectives and priorities. There's a need for greater engagement and collaboration. And I know that being able to provide 3-year funding wherever possible helps the sector to plan and deliver better outcomes. The Welsh Government ministers, and the previous Welsh Government, are promoting the code of practice for funding for the third sector, and especially the multi-year funding and full cost recovery. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with some of the organisations that I'm involved with, and the real impact that this makes, if nothing else, on staff retention. And we're very lucky in the organisations I volunteer with that we have amazing staff who care very much. But we should be looking to that. So I'm really pleased that that's an issue too. We've talked about Community Wealth Fund, the Welsh Wealth Fund. I'm going to say that very slowly. This is about energy generation. It's about ploughing that money back in to our communities. And it's adding a level of resilience that perhaps wouldn't otherwise be there. And I think if communities have money themselves to spend and to decide, they can reach their priorities. I'm old enough to remember Communities First, which didn't quite work everywhere. But the principle is very good. And I think if we can empower those communities to make decisions, have some money to back it up, that would be good.
Thank you very much, Chris. And anybody who knows our work at BCT will know that we certainly support communities having control of money themselves as well. And Sian and Olaf, please, yn y cwestiwn hwnna.
Diolch. Ia, dwi'n ymwybodol iawn pa mor rwystredig ydy bod mudiadau cymunedol ddim yn gallu cynllunio yn iawn oherwydd fod yr arian ddim yn dod yn briodol yn y ffordd dylia fo fod. Mi ddylia fod modd i chi fod yn cynllunio dros gyfnodau o 3 blynedd, 4 blynedd ac yn y blaen. Ac da ni'n gwybod hefyd bod na ddim digon o bres yn dod i Gymru full stop. Hynny yw, mae angen newid y ffordd mae'r fformula Barnett yn gweithio mwyn bod Cymru'n cael mwy o arian, mwy o'r gacen i'w rhannu allan, a mae hynna'n cynnwys mwy o arian ar gyfer y mudiadau cymunedol. Ond wrth gwrs, ddim dyna di'r sefyllfa, ond mi fysa Plaid Cymru yn cwffio'n galad iawn i gael diwygio yr fformula yma sydd yn hen ffasiwn iawn ac yn golygu bod Cymru yn colli allan ar yr arian sydd i angen, a felly mae'r mudiadau sydd yn cefnogi cymunedau yn colli allan ar yr arian. Mae hi yn debygol o fod yn gyfnod eitha anodd o hyd i fewn i dymor llywodraeth nesaf, ac mae Plaid Cymru wedi ymrwymo i sefydlu un gwasanaeth iechyd, un gwasanaeth cyhoeddus ar gyfer y gweithwyr sifil, mwyn gwneud yn siŵr bod yr arian prin sydd yn dod yn cael ei wario yn hollol briodol. Mae hynny'n cynnwys y gyfran sydd yn mynd tuag at y gwaith yn y cymunedau.
Diolch yn fawr, Sian. Earlier in the discussion, we had a shout out to Lee Gardens Pool, which was recognised. Now, there's actually a number of people on this call today who are involved in what we would call local community anchor organisations in the audience, and some of you on the panel will be aware of those organisations as well. So the question is, how will you support the work of neighbourhood-based community anchor organisations like hubs and halls, which offer a focus for a wide range of local community activities, often stepping into spaces where public services have been cut? And how will you strengthen their long-term sustainability? And I'm going to ask Sian to come onto this first, and then Amy and Chris.
Great. I think we've covered, some of this already, haven't we, in the opening statements, etc. But absolutely, it's to enhance the support from the government level that's being given to community enterprises and to community organisations and the anchor organisations. Absolutely. I think the community right to buy, that will also be very useful tool for the community organisations, and making it easier for valued local assets to be brought into community ownership. So it's not all about resourcing the community organisations. It's also in helping those community organisations through legal means, and this one I think is a great one, the community right to buy for Wales. The evidence from Scotland shows, that this would really ease the path of bringing key economic and social assets into community ownership. I think in Scotland, 57% of nominated community assets make it into communal ownership in Scotland. So there are those kind of legal routes that government can help with, as well as ensuring full support to the community anchor organisations going forward.
Josh, Sian. Amy?
Okay, so my understanding from my experience around local hubs and anchor organisations is that some of their biggest costs are around energy of the space, as well as keeping the space up and running, and staff time and volunteers. So I've kind of gone to get from that perspective and picked out things from the manifesto on that front. So we want to move towards supporting as many people as possible to go to a 4-day week. Now, I have done my most volunteering and contribution to my community when I've been working part-time. So maybe 4 days a week means people have more connection in their community, to get involved in cultural things, to get involved with running these kind of community spaces. Then we've got things that are tackling the kind of biggest costs around paying for energy, and that is around getting access to more renewables. So we've got local authorities requiring to ensure access to community spaces. So that means that it's embedded that people have the right to sort of demand that they have a community space that is up and running, and all the things I said before. So that sort of makes it serious, and it means it's going to be embedded. And then we've got a green transformation fund to unlock investment in renewable infrastructure, expanding community energy ownership, which could be on these roofs, community right to buy, as I said before, but it's right to buy energy assets. And then cooperative development hub, helping local groups to develop energy projects and access to funding and expertise. So I'm hoping amongst all of those things, it's kind of different bits of the puzzle to help support those community anchor organisations. That's what I can pick out from the manifesto. I've got other personal opinions, but we might come to those later if there's time.
Thank you very much, Amy. And Chris?
You ask how to support them. Well, the first one is to use them. The reason lots of these community assets are lost is because they're not used. So the first one is we should use them ourselves. If I was elected as a Senate member, I would work to help them find funding. So I've been involved in lots of different funding days that pulls together lots of different funders, whether that's government, lottery, various charitable trusts, to give organisations access to that funding. You sometimes just knowing the fund is there and somebody will think, what a use for that, which is really helpful. In our manifesto, we have a commitment to an energy independent Wales, and I've talked about our Welsh Wealth Fund. The the fund from that would be used. We would create a new wealth fund for future generations using income from renewable energy on public land to invest in our infrastructure. But it's worth noting that the Welsh Government has got a huge, enviable track record on generating social enterprises and cooperatives. The support there through the Welsh Co-op Centre, now Compass, to help organisations to generate that money, it's unbelievable. And if you just have to look, I'm afraid I don't know the other areas as well, but you just have to look around the valleys to see that these organisations are absolutely fantastic. Gwahoddwyd Foundation, I don't know if they're on the call, but they are brilliant. If you've never seen them, you should absolutely go and visit, because they know what to do and how to generate that income, and it's reinvested in the community. It's a former council housing estate, and they really have made such a big difference, and that's replicated across. So, Wealth Fund, support the organisations, be an advocate and a champion for them, put them in touch with organisations that can offer funding and support. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm going to stay on the issue around community anchors and ask questions specifically about the community right to buy. We were certainly very pleased. I think lots of other groups would see all three of your parties put the community right to buy in your manifestos. So quite interested in finding out how you would implement it. And going back onto Sian's point about success in Scotland, the funding has been an important part of that as well from the Scottish Government. So how you would implement and fund community right to buy to be a success for organisations, starting with Chris, then Amy, then Sian, please.
So, look, our manifesto makes it clear that there's a commitment to create a community right to buy. Manifestos are obviously a very top-line document where you can't go into lots of details. But what we've pledged is to take the strongest possible action on this by legislating. So there would be a big process of drafting a bill, scrutiny in the Senate to work out the detail on how to do this. And usually what you would have is a register of assets of community value, and then legislation saying that when one of these assets comes up for sale, the community would have the first refusal. So when that asset comes onto the market, I think it's a sensible way of going things. Welsh Labour would want to listen to community groups and let us about the best way. Just to point out that this isn't done in a silo. So the Welsh Labour has already got the community asset fund. So funding for community groups is there. The battle is sustaining these often afterwards. It can be a battle to buy these too, but it's that sustainability. How do we make sure that if the community clubs together, buys that asset, that it doesn't fall in 6 months, a year, 2 years? So it's that longevity of the project. And I think I've been involved with loads and loads of projects, and it's often easy to get money in the first few years, less so as that project goes on. So the initial help, but then that pump priming to sort of work with them. How can you get a business plan? What funding can you leverage in? And as I say, if I was an MS, I've got a community background, I would very much want to be involved with supporting those groups and empowering them to take decisions that work for them.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's Amy next on this one, please.
Yes, again, our manifesto is quite top line, but in terms of how we might deliver it, crucially, this must be a real right, not just a tick box exercise, is how we see things. Evidence from organisations like the Centre for Public Infrastructure shows that weak right to bid systems fail communities because they offer no guarantee of purchase. A proper community right to buy means communities get first refusal, fair pricing, and enough time to raise the money, so a local effort isn't wasted. Where I have my allotment at the moment, we're trying to do a fundraiser to create a community benefit society because our land has been sold from underneath us, and it's that sort of trying to rush to raise the money, and then you might not actually see anything happen the other side of it. Is really, really frustrating to people. So I feel that. So that's why we want to implement a right to buy alongside practical support. Our manifesto commits to community land funds to help communities actually purchase assets, recognising that access to capital is one of the biggest barriers to community ownership. And we would also embed this in law through our proposed culture bill, placing duties on local authorities to protect community infrastructure. So community hubs are treated as essential public assets, not optional extras dependent on short-term grants. And again, with some of our other support mechanisms I've already mentioned, we'll be supporting people once they're up and running. So I've heard from people who run community things where they've bought a community space like a pub. Sometimes actually then the management of that, the training on the HR, the managing of the flow of money, the cash flow, you know, it's an ongoing thing, and you can be burdened with maybe 1 or 2 people volunteering their time to run these things. And then a bit like was said before, you can get burnout and people not really wanting to stomp up the time to really make those things flourish. So it's that wraparound support as well as the funding.
Thank you. And all ever a question, Sian, please.
Ie, fel o'n i'n deud, mae Plaid Cymru wedi gwneud yn hollol glir y bydden ni yn dod â deddfwriaeth i fewn ynglyn â hawl y gymuned i brynu. Dwi wedi bod yn cefnogi grwpiau lleol yn etholaeth Arfon sydd wedi cael ei dal yn y sefyllfa anodd yma, lle maen nhw rili eisiau prynu y dafarn, neu mewn achos arall prynu'r marina, ond mae na bobl o sector breifat wedi gallu neidio mewn ac wedi gallu codi'r arian, ac felly mae'r gymuned wedi colli allan. So mae rhaid i ni wneud o'n hawl sylfaenol fel bod y tafarndai, siopa, caffes, y tir hefyd yn gallu cael i brynu ar gyfer i berchnogi gan y gymuned. Hynny yw, mi fysa'r gymuned yn cael yr hawl cynta i wrthod y pryniant ynde. So a right first refusal over registered assets, both private and public, as they come up for sale locally. That first refusal would be with the community. In terms of funding, I don't know if we're going to come on to, I think, what BCT are asking for, which is the establishment of a National Endowment Fund. We'll come on to that later, but part of that, we are talking about a Wales Wealth Fund, which is kind of a similar concept, and maybe we can enhance on that later on. But certainly, you know, there needs to be a way of resourcing and making it easier for the local communities to actually be buying, but also maintaining the properties after they've hopefully been able to use the new legislation to get in there first.
Diolch yn fawr, Sian. You can read my mind about what's coming next. So this is where I try and play being a cheap tabloid journalist and get you to all give a yes or no answer, but being good politicians, you'll probably find ways of avoiding this. The question is, would your party support establishing a national endowment fund to invest in the future of community anchor organisations? We suggesting between 30 and 100 million. 2 additional points to that. One is that there is a similar fund being set up in England already for community organisations in England. But the other thing is that for the last few years, the Welsh Government has regularly given back several multiples of this figure to Westminster in underspend at the end of each year. There is potentially some scope there. But Amy, any reflections from you first?
Hi. So in terms of the party, this isn't in our manifesto. So it's not something that I can put forward and say, yes, we 100% agree with. However, it's definitely in line with the spirit of what we're trying to achieve with community-led working. And I personally would like to support it if you, as you say, you've identified a route for that to come in. Yeah, that's probably all I can say on that.
Okay, thank you. Sian?
I had a look at this and thought, you know, really you need a proper answer. So in principle, yes, because, you know, as I said, we do talk about in Plaid Cymru about a Wales Wealth Fund, which will pool a share of profits from large-scale energy projects to invest in community infrastructure. So the concept is similar. What I will say to you is that, you know, we are determined to invest in and support initiatives where there's a clear alignment with our priorities. For example, tackling the cost of living and keeping people well in terms of preventing ill health. So, you know, we would continue to engage on this issue, but in principle, yes. But if Plaid Cymru do lead the next Welsh Government, our door is open to the continued engagement around this particular topic, knowing, of course, that the next government is going to find themselves, in a pretty tight spot financially. This is what everybody is saying to us. But it is a priority area, and yes, we would continue to talk to you about it. And in principle, absolutely.
Diolch, Sian. And Chris.
On that last point, I mean, I know that the recent budget round, there is some money that Mark Drakeford has set aside for any incoming government. So I would just gently point to Sian that perhaps isn't the difficulty you think there might be. If we have, I talked a few times now about the Welsh Health Fund. I think it's got a different name, but it sounds very similar in terms of the outcome. And I think that's the important thing here. We can often get caught up in terms of the name of something, but it's the outcome that's important. And what we want to see, so our pledge is to have an energy independent Wales. And why wouldn't we appreciate that right now with the cost of energy going up? To encourage communities, some communities are already doing this, but to encourage those communities, it's a direct benefit that would be such an incentive to have renewable energy schemes in our local communities, with those profits being reinvested, is such a cooperative socialist idea. It just makes absolute sense. I think it's very much the same ideology, slightly different name, and unfortunately, Chris, I'm not allowed to spend 30 to 100 million pounds. But I'm very happy to have that because if I'm elected.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that deliberately wasn't the easiest question for you. Share the honesty of all three of you, and certainly we will be coming back with this discussion further. Whoever's in the next government. So I'm going to change tack a little bit now. One of the things that we have seen in facing community organisations, and you will have seen it even more so as politicians, is the rise of hate speech, divisive behaviour, and divisions within communities. But in terms of building that sense of belonging that is so important for social cohesion, community organisations are absolutely in their localities. And the question is, how will your party ensure their role is recognised in work taken to strengthen community cohesion across Wales? And I was going to ask Sian to speak first on this, then Chris, and then Amy.
It really worries me what is in store for us as a nation if Reform get their hands on the Welsh Government. And the division, the hatred that we are seeing a lot of on social media will get even worse if Reform are part, in any way, a part of the future Welsh Government. And I would implore to people who don't want to see that situation. The polls are showing very, very strongly that Plaid Cymru are the ones that can keep Reform out of our government. It would be disastrous should we end up there. There are so many tensions already within our societies, and absolutely community organisations can have a vital role in bringing people together. In physical terms, the hubs that we have all over the country, people can walk into those places and become part of a community around those hubs. And I think it is imperative that the focus does move onto, providing those safe places for people in our communities, and bringing different sections of the communities together so that there is a bit better understanding between different elements of our society. But I do implore, we can't let Reform in. I'm glad they're not in this forum tonight, for example, and I wonder how they would answer the particular question that you just asked.
Indeed. But I'm going to ask Chris if you can answer now.
Thanks, Chris. I've been involved, as I mentioned, with Merthyr Pride, and the first one we set up was 2024. It was just coming out of COVID, and we decided we wanted to put on a Pride event in Merthyr Tydfil. There was a small group of volunteers, and some of the horrific bigoted abuse that we faced online was horrendous. And sadly, it's all too predictable now that people will sit at their computer or their phone and tap out a message of hate. What we found in practice was very, very different. The community rallied around us. We had so much support from organisations, businesses, but people turning up on the day, people wanting to volunteer. We sometimes we can get sucked into this spiral that we see things online and we assume that they're true, and they're not. And I think public opinion, reform is a huge threat, but people see through Farage and his snake oil, and we know what Farage and the ex-Tories that are now propping him up have done to our communities over the years. They don't have our interests at heart. Anyone that comes into our communities to try to tear us apart and pit one group against another is doomed to fail, because we know that when you do that, today it might be somebody, tomorrow it'll be somebody else. And it's around that sort of working class solidarity that we stand together, we see those out. And I just pick up on Sian's point once again, I'm afraid. I think Labour is well placed. We said, look, there is no scope for reform here. It is a completely different election to any we've seen before. You vote for the party you want to see the policies, and we will stop reform. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And Amy.
Okay, this is a really interesting question, because I suppose different people see where cohesion's going in sort of different ways. So I think the kind of what you're getting at is how people can be recognised for their role as community anchor organisations, their role as in community groups, to be taken seriously, part of this tackling community cohesion and making sure that it's in place. So one of our key principles is culture as essential infrastructure. And from that comes the idea that people need cultural spaces to mix and get to know each other, to overcome some of these things which mean that they're segregated and isolated maybe on Facebook quite a lot, and they're not actually meeting in real life. When people feel like they have to use their private cars and they're not able to use buses because they're unaffordable, or they're not going to where they need to go at times they want to go, people aren't having those incidental ways of meeting each other, which is actually some of that grease that makes things go round in terms of community cohesion. So many of our different strategies and policies are around making sure people meet each other more in spaces. We want to remove barriers so that everyone can participate in and shape culture in Wales. We want opportunities to participate more, because those are currently in decline. I'm really lucky where I live. We have Other Voices Festival, so that is a community event for people to come together. Other communities aren't so lucky to have such things. We want to protect community spaces, as I've mentioned lots of times before, as an opportunity for people to come together. The Culture Bill, putting a statutory duty on public bodies to support community endeavour. A cultural rights framework guaranteeing participation in cultural life, again, opportunity for people to come together. The bill guaranteeing every community access to cultural spaces, services and opportunities, including strengthening the Welsh language, and public bodies being required to actively increase the use of Welsh in workplaces and in services, as well as Welsh being a medium and a bilingual approach, as opportunities to expand Welsh use and bilingual working in community settings.
We're actually going to go on to a question now, which the candidates haven't seen. This was one I mentioned at the beginning, so I will bring this out carefully. But we felt it was very relevant to a lot of the issues that affect communities in terms of the way that different policies do or don't interact with community organisations. So this question is, how would you link policies on culture, community development and health so that arts and creative activities can maximise their potential to prevent poor mental and physical health, especially in more disadvantaged communities? It's relatively long, but I have to say from our experience, it did seem to hit a lot of nails on the head about some of the key challenges, which is why we were keen to take it. And thank you to the person who put the question forward. I'm going to ask Chris if you could respond to this one first, please.
Thanks very much. So I haven't had time to look at this in our manifesto, unfortunately, but what I would say is I know that those hubs in the community are a huge boost to people's mental health. So when people socialising, so one of the charities I work with specifically looks at older people. One of the problems they have is that their isolations, when people are isolated, they don't have any contact with people. It really affects not just their mental health, but their physical health too. So having those hubs where people can get together, a knitting club, a book club, whatever it might be, it is so important. In terms of creative activities, as I say, I haven't had a chance for the manifesto, but I'd be really keen, whoever put that in the group, to have a conversation and to listen to some of the views there. It's important for me as a first-time candidate to understand what works in communities, what doesn't work. I'd be really happy to do that.
I said that the person who wrote the question is on the call, so perhaps you want to make. Perhaps you can link up in the chat, Angela, if you want to. Amy.
Yeah, a really good question in terms of how we break down those silos and have more joined up approaches, which is very much what we're trying to do with the Green Party approach generally. It's something that I find really frustrating in my work previously, on previous jobs and the current one I have now. So what I've tried to pick out are examples of where we're trying to support that cross-working. So for example, local health and wellbeing hubs, bringing together different kinds of things like physio, podiatry, occupational therapy, but there's no reason why that couldn't also bring in realms of art therapy. I was really interested in dance movement therapy in the past, so I really see the value of bringing different aspects of culture and arts together as a kind of preventative care, especially around things with mental health and preventing mental health wellbeing decline. We have something like the regional wellbeing partnerships with a dedicated budget, clear accountability for reducing health inequality. And again, for all of those things that I've mentioned at all this evening, we would take a co-design approach. So we don't have a top-down approach. Our manifesto is co-designed with various different organisations and different experts in the team. So we'd look to build these regional wellbeing partnerships together with lots of different organisations. It definitely wouldn't be something that was siloed. We want to be looking at bringing all those different things together. And we also have something to bring in, like the right to healthy food. And again, if you've got a right, you can then bring different aspects in it to make sure that people can access it. People are growing it and all the benefits that all those different things bring. So that's my attempt at answering that question.
Thank you, and I appreciate for nobody it's been particularly straightforward getting that question at very short notice. And Sian, please.
Diolch am y cwestiwn yma. Mae'n bwysig ofnadwy dydy, oherwydd da ni yng Nghymru wedi llithro fewn i lywodraeth sydd yn meddwl mewn ffordd silo iawn. Mae'r gwahanol adrannau fel rhyw ymerodraethau bach ar ben eu hunan ac yn anghofio bod angen gweithio ar draws y gwahanol themau. A felly dwi yn meddwl bod hi'n bryd am arweinyddiaeth newydd. We need new leadership. So that we can start to remove some of these barriers. And I think, we need some fresh blood in there to actually take a proper look at how the government itself works. The Plaid Cymru Cabinet would be working thematically across the different departments. It's not like that now. It's very, very much a silo mentality and a silo culture. We would have a public health minister, for example, focusing on the preventative aspects of health, including mental health, but recognising the importance of arts and culture in the well-being of our population, sports as well. There are so many different sectors that need to be brought together under the well-being theme. And we're back again to the Future Generations Act. It's about implementing the Future Generations Act in a proper way, which does mean cross-sectoral, cross-government working. But it actually, to have that happen, we need new leadership.
Thank you, Sian. I'm going to switch topics now to transport, which has been raised a little bit in the chat. Many people in Wales still struggle to access transport, especially in more disadvantaged communities and more geographically peripheral communities. How will you and your party make sure everyone can access reliable, affordable, and fair transport that meets their needs? Amy, could you go first, please, and then Chris?
Yes, so I don't have a car and I live in rural West Wales. So I understand what it's like to try and navigate Wales by public transport. It's certainly a challenge. It's certainly something that needs more joined up thinking, better approaches to integration of bus and train. It's great that we've got the Bus Services Wales bill coming in, but I want to make sure that actually how that's delivered has the voice for communities in there. It talks about communities, but I'm not so far sure that I've seen evidence that the real true community voice, which is it's vast. You know, one person in a community can have a very different need to another. And often when I've worked on transport, it's the last mile connectivity. You may well have a main bus route coming through your village, for example, but you can't get to the bus from your home. It's a real challenge for lots of people, especially with an older population. And Wales has a high population with people with disabilities as well. So we need to make sure that the transport is fit for purpose. In terms of one of the key policies that we're putting out there is around affordability. So this is a £1 single fare for adults aged 22 to 59 and free for the under 22s. Now that's all well and good maybe in bigger towns and cities where those buses are present. In rural Wales where I live, we actually need to get it right in terms of designing the services and make sure that those routes are actually there for people. We also have to bear in mind that in rural areas where you have to travel really long distances, also in cities, I've used a community car share scheme when I used to live in Bristol. We want to make sure that there's funding for organisations such as Tredani, who already have funding from Welsh Government, which is very welcome. But we want to make sure that that's continued and supported, because a community car share scheme, especially if it's an electric car, that really starts to plug some of those gaps with people, especially if those public transport buses might not be financially viable or people cannot use public transport.
Thank you, Amy. Chris.
Thanks. Yeah, the Wales Bus Services Act is now law and will be rolled out, I think it starts after the election. It's a phased rollout, exactly because what's right for one community wouldn't be right for another. But the fact that it's unbelievable that this is Thatcherite privatisation that we've had to overturn. You know, I was born in 1980. We've now overturned it, and it's amazing. It's taken so long, but there's a lot of bus companies involved. But this is great stuff. So what we're saying is we've got that. We will involve local authorities, Transport for Wales. We'll be rolling it out to make sure that the community needs are there. We will also cap, if we're in government, bus fares at £2. That's amazing. When you think that you have the cost of living crisis and being able to get to work or for social, just for socialising, £2 bus fare, absolutely brilliant. But trains, most journeys are done by bus, but the trains in the valleys, we've had the electrification of the core valleys line. Funded by the Welsh Government, these services are running, they're brand new electric trains built in Wales. They are running every 15 minutes, which is amazing. Tram-like trains, station upgrades. Public transport is going to look completely different in a few years to what it did at the start of this decade, even. So it's on the up. There's a lot of this stuff happens behind the scenes, and it takes a long time to bed in. But it's been done. It's coming, and if anyone's been on a train recently, you'll have seen it.
Thanks, Chris. And finally, Sian on this question, please.
Mi oedd Plaid Cymru yn hapus iawn I gefnogi y bil buses hefyd sydd yn mynd I fod yn rhoi cyfle I awdurdodau lleol yn gweithio efo'r cymunedau. Mae hynny yn bwysig ac yn gweithio hefo'r mudiadau sydd yn cynrychioli cymunedau I fod yn gwella y gwasanaethau y buses. Dwi hefyd yn gwybod yng nghefn Gwlad Cymru pa mor bwysig ydy cludiant cymunedol. Mae y grŵp o ddrws i ddrws, enghraifft, yn Llŷn wedi bod yn weithgar iawn yn darparu gwasanaeth cymunedol ar alw, ac eto mudiad Dyma'r elw yn lleol sydd wedi bod yn rhedeg hwnna ers rhai blynyddoedd. Felly mae angen rhoi sylw i gludiant cymunedol. Mi fysa ni hefyd yn parhau hefo yr bysfedd pynt a hefyd yr tair pynt tocyn diwrnod i bobl ifanc ac yn cadw'r pasys bus yn ogystal. Ac mae'r integreiddio yma rhwng y gwahanol gwasanaethau ac efo y cludiant cymunedol ac efo trena, lle mae trena yn bodoli wrth gwrs. Mae yna dalpia mawr o gefn Gwlad Cymru lle does dim tren, ond mi petai ni wedi cael biliynau sydd arno Llywodraeth yr UK i Gymru oherwydd y HS2. Petai gynnon ni'r biliynau yna, mi fyddan ni'n gallu rili gwella y sefyllfa o ran cludiant yng Nghymru. Mae o'n holl bwysig bod ni'n rhoi sylw yn ystod y cyfnodau nesaf yma rwan i wirioneddol weithio ar gael y pwera i wella y rhwydwaith rheilffyrdd yng Nghymru.
Diolch yn fawr, Sian. So coming to the last question now, I must admit, if you'd asked me a few years ago whether community development and constitutional politics would ever get together, well, I'd have said no chance. But unfortunately, we are in that position. So we recognise, and we've written about this, that programmes like Pride in Place are problematic constitutionally because of what they do to devolution settlement. But for local communities, they do actually offer potential for sustained investment. And if your party was running the Welsh government, how would you look to work with local authorities and communities in their delivery? And can I come to Chris first, please?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, there's obviously been a lot of constitutional wrangling over this, as you mentioned, but there is an opportunity here, and some people will focus on the constitution side. I'm afraid, as somebody who is very much from the community, I know lots of groups will very much welcome this money. For lots of them, it will be a lifeline, and that's to be welcomed. I think long-term funding for community action, and it involves capital funding for improvements to the physical fabric of a place, which is something we've talked about quite a bit this evening. If I'm elected as an MS, I'd love to play that role as a facilitator, so bringing groups together, making sure that there's a community voice, not just in Pride in Place, but transforming towns too, because when people feel a part of the decision making, it lasts. And I think it's my job to be an advocate for the people that I seek to represent. I've done that as a trade union shop steward. So I would want to be holding public events, talking to the community about what their priorities are for the money, whether whoever the decision makers would be and acting as advocates for the grassroots, so whether that's local authorities, Welsh Government, the UK, it would be my job, all of our jobs as prospective candidates, to be the voice of the people we want to serve.
Thank you, Chris. Can I come to Amy next, please?
So in terms of the Pride in Place style programmes, again, sort of reiterating what has been said before in terms of supporting that, working with councils and communities on delivery, referring back to the co-production with communities as a norm for all local plans, empowering local authorities with statutory duties rather than ad hoc programmes, and supporting community ownership and long-term control of local assets rather than competitive funding models. I think I'll leave it there. I'm sort of getting quite tired now, concentrating.
Right. Yes, fair. We put you through quite a lot. And Sian, please.
There's no doubt it is a constitutional problem, and I'm afraid it does suggest that the UK government is seeking to undermine devolution, and we must be really, really, vigilant about any of those attempts. But there's also, there are practical points as well. the funding, from what I can see, is for neighbourhoods of around 10,000 people or above. Well, gosh, you know, there aren't that many in the west of Wales, in the 4 western local authorities. You know, there are only a handful of communities that are actually going to benefit from this fund. So once again, you know, rural communities are missing out because the programme just doesn't serve their needs. And of course, it's been top flight, hasn't it? We were supposed to receive 633 million, but, you know, we're not. There's a reduction of the 86 million coming to Wales. So, you know, there are problems with it, but gosh, I'm a pragmatist. You know, if there is money coming to communities, deprived communities, of course, deprived communities and community organisations are going to be able to use that money and are going to welcome funds, aren't they? You know, so as a complete pragmatist, of course, you know, if I was a community organisation, I would be applying for that money and using that money for the benefit of my community. But, you know, let us not forget the constitutional problems and the lack of thinking here. It doesn't actually suit the needs of a lot of our communities here in Wales.
Yeah, Sian. I mean, I think just to add to that final point, I know it's probably challenging for a number of Valleys communities as well, which are also too small for the 10,000 threshold.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm going to abuse my position as chair to ask you all one final, quite challenging follow-up. When you get programmes which are about communities and local authorities working together, it's very easy for political parties to side with the local authorities who have the same party affiliation. And I'm just wondering, if you were in government, how would you ensure that community voices were strong in programmes that were officially led by local authorities? Sian, could you go first on this, please?
I can, yes. At the moment, 4 out of how many local authorities are there? 22 are run by Plaid Cymru. The rest are run by Labour or a mixture of other parties, mostly Labour in the valleys. So, you know, I think we need new leadership because of that kind of situation, that coziness that can happen. Which then leads to the local authorities and governments working hand in glove and forgetting about the voice of communities and the community organisations. You know, so I think just think about that, just as a fact. But in terms of keeping that going, absolutely, you know, communities, we need to be listening to our communities and bring in the voices in the different fora that we have in citizens' assemblies, in all kinds of ways that government can be engaging with our local communities.
Diolch, Sian. Amy, please.
Hi. So I would say the kind of work I do at the moment through the Local Policy and Innovation Partnership, supporting communities to basically design and gather a research about their own community, so they've got evidence to then take that evidence to decision makers. And so I would love to see a rollout of communities learning how to hear each other's voices. So rather than a kind of top-down consultation model that when we go into communities, they say absolutely despise, they'd rather, you know, I'd rather see something where there's funding for communities to learn how to basically gather stories from one another, understand how to prioritize, how to trade off what one person's needs are with another and come up with some kind of benefit for everybody where there's a bit of give and take, and learning those skills, because actually there's lots of relationship building skills and communication skills that are needed still, because people have become quite isolated over the recent years, especially since COVID. And so having people being able to understand one another, come with a joint voice and some evidence to policymakers at local council level, will put in good stead and strengthen that community voice, I think, to be taken seriously by those decision makers, given my experience, you know. In terms of how Green Party works, even if it was the Green Party was in charge of the council and I as an MS, we are completely independent. We don't have any whipping. We don't have anything where we need to do exactly what the party says, so we can be independent, so I can call to account any councillors who might be in my same party.
Thank you. And last, Chris, please.
Thanks, Chris. I don't think there's an inherent conflict here. Any good local authority, whatever its political makeup, is reliant on the residents to vote them in. And good local councillors will take account of what the community wants. And as an MS, our job would be to make sure that we advocate without fear or favour for the needs of the community. It's not to pick a side. Look, I hope it's come through from the things I've said this evening, that my background is very much collaborative as a member of the cooperative party, but as a trade unionist. You don't go into things seeking conflict. You try to find a resolution. And I think some of those times it can be helpful to bring people together to see things from a different perspective. But the premise that there is a conflict in whose side you're going to take, I don't think that is quite how I've been in anything I've been involved with so far. As an MS and as a representative, I would want to listen to both sides of the community, be an advocate for the people that I represent. But in my experience, local authorities, certainly the political side of local authorities of whatever colour, have always been willing to listen to the views of community volunteers, because at the end of the day, they're providing a service for people. It adds value to our society, and there's a benefit there. And again, I can see Larry's timer, and I don't want to be cut off for the last question.
Thank you very much, Chris. Right, so that's the end of the questions. Thank you very much for all your contributions. There's really good comments in the chat as well. I am going to give the candidates a minute to wrap up, and then I've got a couple of points to add at the end. So in terms of the wrap up, just 1 minute to summarise the main points, and anything you want to re-highlight. And I'm going to ask if Chris could go first, then Sian, then Amy, please.
You keep catching me out, Chris. Okay, look, first off, I'd just like to say a big thank you to BCT again for organising this evening's event. It's been really interesting. Usually I sit on the audience side. Being on the panel is a different perspective, and I hope I've been somewhat helpful. It's clear how important community groups are in our daily lives, and that the impact a progressive government can have. I'm really proud that successive Welsh Labour governments have supported community groups, and I'm genuinely excited about the work that lies ahead. There's a risk at this election from parties that don't have the same values and only seek to divide. But on the 7th of May, division will be on the ballot, but so too will fairness, community and solidarity, and you'd get that with Welsh Labour. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Chris. Sian?
Diolch yn fawr iawn am gynnal yr noson yma, heno yma. Dwi'n meddwl bod o wedi bod yn fuddiol iawn, a dwi eisiau dysgu mwy am yr hyn da ni wedi bod yn drafod heno yma, ac yn sicr yn barod i wrando i chi, y bobl sydd yn agosa at y mudiadau cymunedol ac yn gweithio yn y mudiadau cymunedol, fel bod ni wirioneddol yn symud tuag at wlad sydd yn ymbweru yn cymunedau ni. Mae yna gymaint o botensial o fewn yn cymunedau ni, ac mae angen llywodraeth newydd, gwaed newydd, mwyn harnesu yr sefyllfa yna ac i gefnogi y cymunedau i ddod yn llefydd sydd yn llawn bwrlwm ac yn llawn gweithgareddau sydd yn cynnal pobl, unigolion, ac yn rhoi llesiant yn pobl ni yn flaenllaw.
Diolch yn fawr, Sian. And Amy.
Thank you so much this evening. It's been so interesting, everyone. One of the reasons I've moved from Bristol 5 years ago to West Wales is because of the sense of community. I love the fact that I can walk down the street and say hello to people, and I've got to know everyone. I need to leave 10 minutes to walk across the village now because everyone I bump into and have a chat to. And it's one of those things that is really still vibrant in West Wales and really needs all the support that it deserves. Just looking at some of the chat questions there, we do want to establish a long-term programme of rail investments and rail electrification, because I didn't get a chance to say that. And we do want to devolve the Crown Estate. So I hope that made someone happy in the comments there. Yeah, I put my email in the chat, really up for any kind of co-design ideas you've got. And you all know that I work at Together for Change now, and I'm also willing to have chats with people about stuff in the work we do, as well as a side, because we're always working on community-based work. It's something I'm really, really super passionate about. And if I get in as the Green Party, even though we won't be leading, we'll definitely be making sure that we can support whoever does lead to make sure communities get a stronger voice.
Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. Just a couple of quick words for me to finish. First of all, huge thanks to our candidates. We've put them through a series of fairly grueling questions. It's been a very constructive discussion. You may not like me saying this, but it sounds to me as though you have a lot of values in common, which we hope would play out in cooperation in the Senedd from where we sit. It's been a real pleasure having you all on and hearing your perspectives. And also huge thanks to the audience as well. Lots of great questions in advance and lots of really interesting comments in the chat, and thank you for staying with us. One obvious point: some of the comments have been broader than the themes we were looking at tonight, but the manifestos of all three parties are on their websites, because I've been looking at them recently, so they're definitely there and easily to find, and that will be true for the other parties as well. I think the Lib Dems manifesto was published today, and that was the last one. What I would encourage picking up on a point that I think Chris made, that I would strongly advise all community organisations, invite your new MSs to come and see you once they're elected, because I think that will help build a mutual understanding, and I think that's going to be very important going forward. And just a couple of things that we'll be saying as BCT, but I think are reflected in some of the comments about the next Welsh Government. We know that money will be tight, but can we please find better ways of using what we have got it? Use it in a more long-term and joined up way. Break down some of those silos. And just to warn whoever is in government, we and a lot of other organisations, including Welsh Local Government Association, are currently working on development of a communities policy on actually how communities and public bodies can work better together across different priority areas, and that'll be landing on the desk of the new government in the first few months of its existence. And I hope that'll be something that everyone will be willing to discuss with us. But diolch yn fawr am popeth heno. Nos da, and I hope for a chance for the candidates to relax, because I know you've got a very, very busy, grueling time at the moment. Thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr.